Hello everyone, this is Sean Reardon and welcome to my presentation of the Project Manager interview with Mark Karshies for EAC582, Dr. White's class. I'm also being assisted here by my audio and visual engineer, Lane Reardon. Thank you very much, darling. She's my daughter, and without her I would not be able to get this done. So we're going to jump into the interview. I hope you enjoy it. I know you to be an expert in the field of quality management, and I thought what would be interesting is to take a deep dive into something that I think is probably misunderstood and maybe misapplied by a lot of project managers, somebody like me included. I don't really understand quality. I understand the word, but it's got a couple meanings. So that's what we're going to talk about, I hope, tonight and get some of your experience. So could you just kind of introduce yourself and then we'll jump right into our quality discussion and kind of follow the conversation wherever it goes.
Yeah, so absolutely. So thanks for contacting me on this one, and thanks for the kind words. I'm blushing over here. I'm Mark Karshies. I'm the managing director or managing partner for a small boutique consultancy that is performing project management, customer experience management, corporate strategy, learning development programs, excellence award, quality management, you name it, for a variety of different industries out here in the region. We're doing this for the last 8 years out here in this market, and have worked with anything from Almarai, the big milk manufacturer, over to ministries, hospitals, Johns Hopkins Hospital over in Khobar, telco providers, do Etisalat, Telco, Viva Kuwait, to companies over here in Dubai like DIWA, RTA, Dubai Economic Department, Dubai Chamber, several of the banks obviously out here. So initially I'm a banker, but I worked my way through operations, IT, project management, sales, quality management, risk management, to now do what I really enjoy, which is customer experience management and service strategy, predominantly bringing this to this market and improving the life of customers. So that's.
I then asked Mark, what kind of situations does he find himself in as a project manager? Asked him to explain a little bit of his background and what kind of experiences he has in different situations. Let's hear from Mark.
There are actually three different scenarios that I work in. One scenario is that I get hired as a subcontractor by other firms that have larger engagements when they bring project teams, 3 to 20 people in, and they hire me either as a subject matter expert on a specific field, let it be program management, implementation, quality management, excellence programs, and so on. And then I take an SME, a subject matter expert role inside the project team, or they actually use me to manage the whole program on behalf of that firm. Because of my background, having worked in so many different areas, that I can do multiple roles at the same time, or understand the needs and expectations of the client and can direct at that point properly.
Yeah.
The second scenario would be that organizations take me on directly as an add-on resource where they provide their internal teams and they use me to train them up and speed up the process, but let the internal team, the internal employees, do the actual work so they learn while doing it and therefore make this project more sustainable, that they don't need to rely in the future on project managers or on external people coming in. And the third scenario is literally doing my own thing, coming in and short notice, parachuting into an organization, like Rambo style, the one person, to take care of everything. Very quick turnaround, very high significant programs, where it's literally within a week or 2 weeks, where actually the coordination of larger teams would take too much time, and that time is not there. Then I'm literally doing the project manager, all the team members, all the quality control, all in one person to just speed things up. So all three scenarios can actually happen.
So I would imagine that this third scenario, not everybody can do that. It must take a lot of experience to be able to go in there because certainly you're not going to be able to have as much time to document projects, do a lot of project planning. So can you talk about your training for managing projects and programs versus your experience?
So on one side, I was very lucky that wherever I worked, and I worked 17 years for Citibank in many different businesses in Europe, in the US, and always with great teams and great mentors in there. So that I learned hands-on, virtually anywhere from starting off as a teller and service advisor to becoming the operations director for 9 countries in Europe for Diners Club, managing large-scale transformation and ultimately selling off the business. So that means I have technically done every single role there is inside the organization, from the trenches all the way to senior leadership, in a variety of functions. So it was not always operations, but I did IT, I did project management, I did program management, quality management, risk management, sales, any function I have done. Yeah. So that helps me to connect from a practical background, understand where the problems are, and speaking the same language. So from a communication standpoint and going into the business, I'm not coming in as like, oh, here comes someone with a, Ivy League business degree and telling everyone what to do, but they have not really sniffed the dirt themselves. I come in and I speak the same language. I know exactly where the problems are, and I can back it with the detailed experience. But the experience itself works best and is more efficient if you know the frameworks, the shortcuts, the way how you kind of like go through. So I was always keen on putting, let's say, an educational aspect to it to back my experience with the underlying frameworks. So I am certified by Project Management Institute, PMI, as a CAPM, Certified Associate in Project Management, which is kind of like the slightly smaller version of the PMP, but it's the same framework part behind it. I'm a Prince2 practitioner, so I learned the Prince2 project management framework. In quality management, I'm a Six Sigma black belt. I'm trained by McKinsey on lean management. I'm a certified quality manager by ASQ. I'm a certified customer experience professional by CXPA. I'm trained by Kaplan Norton on balanced scorecard. I'm an ISO 9000 lead auditor. So the certification part to it helps to back this up with the shortcuts, with the frameworks behind it. My education background, yes, I have a bachelor in finance and banking, but then my MBA I did in strategy management and brand management. So I have pretty much everywhere the theory and the wording and the vocabulary and understand the frameworks, but at the same time, the applied knowledge where I can say this is why it matters. In reality, all those three methodologies have an overlap of the tools and methodologies of 80%. It's just the extra add-on. So if you know one, you only need to add 20% knowledge and you have 2 certifications. You have 20% more, you have 3 certifications. Then comes project management. The component in PMI's PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge, on quality management or project quality management specifically outlines the basic quality tools that are being taught in virtually all the quality parts. So again, there's an overlap of probably 30% in what you're doing. So with little effort more and the open-mindedness to take on different aspects allows you to kind of like see the same problem from different angles. And the more angles you get, the more you can elevate yourself into a bird's eye view and actually say, okay, now I get the strategic role or the strategic problem. I can define it. I can see where the gaps are and then dive in and actually resolve the individual aspects.
At this point, I really got interested in Mark's international experience. Of course, he's German, so I asked him whether his experience speaking multiple languages and living in Europe amongst many countries, whether that flexibility was an asset to him.
Well, I have worked in many different areas. So even when I worked, for example, for 5 years in the US, we worked for the South American market. So at that point, I got exposure to virtually all the Latin American countries. And even though we say Latin Americans or Latinos are all the same, there are significant differences culturally. Same in Europe. So when I was managing the 9 countries in Europe, I had offices in Paris, Brussels, Zurich, London, Frankfurt, Milan, Rome. Do I forget any? And Brussels reporting to me. Paris, Brussels, I forgot. I don't know which one I forgot. And then the call centers were in Barcelona in Spain, in Warsaw in Poland, and our back office processing was in Chennai in India. So when you bring now the different mentalities in there, there's a significant difference culturally behind it. So when you understand what the cultural differences are, that, let's say in Belgium, for example, that there's two complete different groups. One is more towards the Dutch side, one more to the French side, and there are potential, let's say, friction behind it. Yes, it's okay to know PMI and Prince2 and kind of like all those frameworks, but you cannot apply them beyond kind of like the culture of the team. So if they don't want to work with each other because they have like some animosity, think of like Texans against New Yorkers or Californians against, kind of like Alabama or whatever it would be, you put them into the mix, it might become tricky to let them speak the same language. So a lot of work in project management, in quality management, in any type of management really, is to bridge those divides and build a coherent team that looks beyond the personal aspect into what is at stake and what is really the purpose of putting everyone together. And if everyone understands the purpose, then you can start applying, here is your share of that purpose to be fulfilled. And then really the sum of one plus one plus one becomes five, and everyone works in a much better way together.
Quality. I mean, are we talking about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? I mean, I hope you've read that book. It's all about quality and how hard this notion of quality is. What is quality, Mark?
Yeah. So it's actually quite funny. I'm doing in parallel throughout the day right now a training for one of the large telcos here in the region. And the first day, I literally spent on unlearning for them what they thought quality was.
Mm-hmm.
Because even American Society for Quality, ASQ, that has literally only kind of like 3 words in there. Everyone knows what, I mean, it's American, it's a society, and it's for quality. Yet the ASQ does not have one definition of what quality actually means. Every single framework that they maintain, Six Sigma, TQM, the CQPA certification, CQIA, each one of them uses a different definition of what quality means, because it's always a subjective term to address a specific problem inside the organization. Not really making sense if you really think about it, because to be defect free is extremely expensive. Motorola went bankrupt over trying to be what they call Six Sigma compliant, meaning having very stable processes. So there is a certain point, and that's why I don't like the quality term as defect free. I see more a value approach behind it. What you try to do is you try to improve until further improvement is not adding any further value. Think even in infrastructure projects. I mean, look around. There's like so many buildings that get started where there's no reason, because no one wants to buy any more real estate right now. Yeah. So it's like, do the people continue building and therefore sink more money into an endless hole where you will never kind of like make up that money? So the point would be, there's a point of no return where you need to continue building because you don't want to have kind of like only kind of like the concrete structure. But if you are just digging the hole for the foundation and there's no market anymore, why should you continue? So at that particular point, the business model should actually say, stop doing your project because you will never be able to generate value. And therefore, before you go into pouring the concrete into the foundation, you would actually say, okay, cancel the project or hold it until we know better. And quality management works the same way. When you're kind of like going through, you need to define what is it what you're doing. You need to be able to define what is it what we try to achieve. So in Lean, for example, your achievement is remove waste from your processes, from your organization. In Six Sigma, the goal is make the processes more and more consistent.
Yeah.
And what is kind of like good and what is good enough. And that's ultimately the management aspect behind it, where actually we as managers should have the fiduciary responsibility, because we're dealing with other people's money, whether we should continue or not. Because of my background, I do a wide range of different projects. So let it be that I implemented and defined the corporate strategy for a real estate company or a real estate management and asset management company. On the other hand, I was implementing project management offices for a large governmental entity in one of the countries out here that had like the underlying project had a value of about $1 billion US. And my role was to actually put control frameworks in place because they felt that the project management company that they had in was not doing the ethical stuff, that they were taking them for a ride. So my role was to enable the internal stakeholders to better control. And sure enough, within 15 minutes, I kind of like found already discrepancies where they were taking for about $200 million for a ride. So this is kind of like when you generate value, because you're walking in and what is clear for me in front of them because of my experience might be hidden in plain sight for them. So obviously you address what needs to get done in a complete different manner. For the other client with the $1 billion project, it was not about kind of like the project input or the project budgets, for example, themselves, because you cannot save 20%, of a project budget just like that. But what we figured was that the project was overdue and was actually taking longer than what they thought. So the project itself was fine, but because of the project delay that they were hiding, they actually had to buy external resources. They were not able to utilize the assets that were kind of like bound in there. And the asset utilization that they didn't have ultimately cost them 200 million with longer maintenance schedules, problems with kind of like having to rent and lease other facilities, not having full operational capabilities, and so on. But the idea on this one was that, see, when I come not in as the project manager. That's where my understanding of taking a step back, like as a banker, I look at like the bigger picture from a financial standpoint. As an operations manager, I would say it's nice that you do a project, but you do the project because you have an operationalization afterwards. You want to do something to improve a business to then operate on a higher level. Do you even have the capabilities? What if your project is delayed? What do you do in this time frame in between? Because you cannot operate, and that's when you lose out revenue and so on. So it's not the project that loses out, it's a different budget in a different part of the organization. And very often project managers don't either have the business experience or the business managers, the project experience to bring those two things together. Purpose. Like, as I said, in the $1 billion project, I was brought in to independently verify that the project managers were actually, when they were saying they were controlling it, were actually doing it. And it took me 15 minutes to find out, no, they were not. Yeah. With as simple, in that particular project, what happened was the timeline was slipping. And every week they were giving the report. And in every week, the chart that was kind of like showing when the work would be done, the chart would move over by 1 week. So it was not visible because they didn't put the baseline in it. If they would have the baseline, they would see this is what we plan to do, this is where we are. But they were only showing the actual status. Report looked great. It was buried in like 30 pages of weekly report that, of course, no one was reading. So the guy actually told me, it's like, I think we're running late in the project, but I don't know what's it. So, okay, give me a report from 4 months ago. He gave me a report from 4 months ago, which was obviously in the same template. I took the 2 pages, put them on top of each other, and held them against the window. And all of a sudden, obviously, you could see the light coming through. You see 2 different charts. He says, what happened there? I said, well, your project is 4 months late. He said, how could the project be 4 months late? I said, well, they didn't tell you. That's exactly where the oversight is.
At this point in the interview, we switch to the discussion of the project management office, the roles, the functions, whether it brings value to projects necessarily. So let's listen to Mark talk about the PMO. It matters how it's executed.
Yeah. So when we talk about PMO, again, there are different reasons why you do a PMO. One is a pure controlling state, where the PMO is kind of like the specialist that manage the value. Mm-hmm. So they're like externals that monitor that the project managers from within the business do the right thing and follow procedures and documentation frameworks and so on. Sometimes PMOs are kind of like groups of experts that are kind of like internal consultants that if a business unit wants to do something, they have a pool of people readily available that they send in as special forces, get that sorted, and then they go back into the PMO. Sometimes the PMO actually has the control over both. So they're the ones that ultimately manage everything, even the control over what aspects need to be done, how the strategic integration works, why this project is important or not, and then manage it themselves and then hand over a fixed product. And then ultimately it's like, okay, here is operations or IT or whatever it would be. Here's your project. Now do something with it. So the purpose of a PMO can be totally varied. Now, if the PMO is a controlling factor in there, and especially for large organizations that are very complex, that have a lot of things going on, there should be a certain level in there. For example, the evaluation criteria. What makes a project successful or not? What is kind of like the business case calculation? Typical one would be, what is your internal rate of return of this project? What is the cost of capital against it? If you tell me when we implement this project, we make 5%, but we have to borrow the money on the market for 10%, we're actually losing money. So those standard ways of applying a project are actually what a PMO can probably do better than the business itself, because they interact with risk, they interact with finance, they interact with strategy management, and so on. And they have the power, because they're not directly involved with this project, to actually say, guys, get real, we don't need this project, it's canceled or put on hold. If the business unit does it themselves, it might be a pet project for a senior manager that just happens to need the outcome of this project on his personal CV for the next one that they're rolling out.
Yeah.
The typical example right now is digitization. Everyone wants to do digitization. Why? If your average customer, your most profitable customers, are 55-year-old people without mobile broadband, somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the US, why do you actually need to develop kind of like the latest branch that is automated with artificial intelligence and a call center that is answered by a robot, not by a person, and WhatsApp stuff? It's for the wrong customer base. But a marketing manager might need that particular project because it's the thing to have in their CV. So a PMO could stop those managers and actually say, listen, strategically, there's no reason for that. And that's where the controlling aspect, and let's say adding some sanity into this whole thing, or playing devil's advocate and forcing everyone really to look at the same thing. Not because you as a department, you have money, like marketing, means that you can spend all that money. If you don't have a project that brings enough return in the scheme of everything, give us the money, we can give it to a unit that needs it more.
Yeah. Later in the interview, Mark and I talked about project schedules and time, which leads to this funny quote attributed to Warren Buffett about you can't make a pregnancy happen any faster than 9 months. You can't combine 9 women and get a baby in 1 month. So let's listen to him talk about project time schedules.
So one thing that very often happens is time is the only resource that you can never get back, because time, once it's gone, it's gone. So most issues that projects have is ultimately that there's a time delay in it. And you can only put so many resources against that project to catch up with time. It's kind of like the joke around the pregnant woman. You know, it's like one woman is kind of like pregnant for 9 months, put 9 mothers against it, you get the baby in 1 month. It doesn't work that way. And there are actually studies that show that in IT projects, for example, at a certain point, adding more engineers and more developers is actually slowing down the project because there's more coordination necessary and so on. So the approaches that I usually take is I look first of all at time. Are you late or not? If you claim you're not late, are you truly not late? Because I can look at, have you put money against it? Have you actually done recently change orders to change the scope? Because if you're running late, what you do is you reduce the quality scope.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, you're not fulfilling the value that is behind it. So I can look into kind of like the different components and see, have there been significant changes or not? If you find only one of them, you know something is not quite right. And then you just dive in and you follow the money. So very often you need money to catch up. But here again, in project control, there's a problem between when you incur the cost and when you actually account for the cost. So for example, I know that my project is due at the end of the year and I need 50 more resources to kind of get the project done. I don't have much project budget anymore, but I still hire the people. Why? Because the invoice becomes only due in January. So in other words, yes, it looks like I'm in budget because I haven't paid yet, but I've already committed the resources to it. So that means that if I look, for example, in the accounting side, when do they actually incur cost and how fast are they paying the invoices? Is finance actually caught up or not? I don't look at actual cost paid, but rather I look at actual cost incurred. And that's usually not shown to the finance guys because the project managers hold back invoices, for example, or move them into the next month. And if you have indications like that, you know that the project control is not working very well. But like when I worked in Citibank, for example, we had a standard operating procedure for project management for large projects as well as for small projects. And even the small project document was 180 pages long, which was the instruction on how to manage projects. But we knew that we were following the same procedures as Japan, Germany, or South Africa would be following. So that means that in the end, because we were all following the same processes, we could share resources. For example, I was member of the imaging workflow expert group. So I was one of 7 managers globally working inside Citibank, being a specialist on imaging workflows. Like you scan something in, the item goes through the network somewhere else for data processing and so on. Early stage. I mean, I'm old, so this was like the late 90s, early 2000s, right? But at that point, because there were not that many projects internationally to do that, so you couldn't have every country having 5 or 7 experts. We were drawn from all over the world to do this, but the only reason why we could do that is because every country had to follow the same process. If everyone would have had their own project management approaches, evaluation criteria, standard control processes, documentation requirements, and so on, we would have needed to relearn every single business concept, and that would have taken the value out of it.
At this point of the interview, we switch back to the billion-dollar project that Mark was talking about. You can tell that Mark's got a very strong personal set of ethics that he has and he holds very closely. You can also tell that he has probably got a justified mistrust of certain project managers who get into situations where there is a conflict of interest that prevents them from reporting correctly. So we're going to listen to Mark discuss a continuation of the billion-dollar project that he had found $200 million of delay, and learn from him what he sees as a potential ethical conflict with the project manager.
Now, if I would talk to the project manager, they would obviously have not an incentive to bring this information on. So therefore, it's always the question, who brings you in, for what purpose? Are they listening to you or not? And in this case, the 4 months, when we extrapolated that up and really reviewed the project, we found out the project was close to a year late. So the only thing I needed to do is say, what is your operating budget for 1 year? 200 million. 1 year delay means you're paying 200 million extra because your project is not done.
Right.
And they were looking at me, it's like, oh my God.
What do you attribute that major, error, or perhaps it was intentional on the project managers, because that happens in the region, right? I hope these things would be less likely to happen in North America and Europe.
No,
because
absolutely the same thing. Absolutely the same thing.
Same thing.
Actually, it was a European contractor that was doing work in this region.
Yeah.
So the Europeans were ultimately the ones that were kind of like cheating out on this particular system.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's unfortunately a feature of business here where, local regional companies who may not have the business savvy, the data savvy to interpret charts and graphs, and we're doing things in 2 languages, may be more likely to trust than to verify. So, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, one thing obviously is when someone comes in with a shiny degree and whatever it is. I mean, I can come in and say, "Oh, I have a degree from an Ivy League. I have all those certifications. You got to trust me." And people are like starstruck and they're like, "Oh, this is awesome. This guy really must know what's going on." But in reality, what happens is the degree or whatever doesn't mean anything if you're not thinking on behalf of the client. It's the way how you apply it. So one big thing that always needs to be seen, is there any type of conflict of interest in the way how the project A was set up or how it's being managed and overseen? Because what you very often see is that the project manager is also put in charge of project oversight. And if the project manager runs late and he just says, listen, next year I'm retiring anyway, I just need to squeeze out another year and then I'm retiring anyway, it's their problem. There are enough people out there that will actually do that.
Is that the fox? Is that the fox guarding the hen house kind of situation there?
Exactly. And that's kind of like when you understand multiple frameworks, when you understand kind of like the context on how the frameworks came up in the first place, then you actually understand much more how they come in. So again, example in quality management, Lean, which is kind of like a waste reduction methodology, was really invented by Toyota in right after the Second World War. There was a time when Japan was completely down, they didn't have resources and so on.
Known for junk manufacturing.
So Germany, the same thing, exactly. So it's like ultimately what happened was they were actually looking into waste reduction because they couldn't afford waste. When you look at statistical process control, consistency in quality, like Six Sigma, Six Sigma came later, but like statistical process control, the root of it was invented in wartime, 1930s, 1940s. Why? You needed to produce a lot of material that was absolutely identical and was reliable. So when you build ammunition, the last thing that you want is a soldier storms up the beaches of Normandy and the bullets don't fit.
Yeah.
So that means a lot of the quality tools from the 30s were all about consistency. Total quality management, which is very much people-centric, was very much driven in the 70s and 80s when kind of like everything was about love and peace. So when people realized people are not machines, therefore we need to have more of that in there. So if you understand how the models came up, PMI, project managers doing their own rules. Prince 2, government doesn't want to be taken advantage of. If you understand who did it and in which context, you understand what kind of like the framework is really all about and can help out.
Yeah. We switched to probably what is one of my favorite examples from my interview with Mark, and that is the discussion about the delay in the opening of the Dubai Mall. The Dubai Mall, which has the largest retail space in the world, probably at its peak is producing tens of millions of dollars a day in revenue, was delayed by 4 years. There's a couple of good stories here and lots of good lessons learned for any up-and-coming project managers that I think you will enjoy. Also note that there's a National Geographic documentary about the Dubai Mall with a link in the slides.
A good example on this one was it was kind of like the Dubai Mall project, the largest mall in the world. When that was being built, the project was close to, I think, 4 years late. Again, not having the mall up meant 4 years of revenue was not coming in, and therefore it was a huge financial impact. No one talks about that. But when you actually look at the project manager on this one, they were confirming, we have the deadline, we will make the deadline, we will actually do it. But when you look at the risk management that's behind it, so one part, for example, that delayed the opening of the mall was the large aquarium. Because it's such a large part that you first have all the parts in before you can close the front of the mall. So it's like if you now have a delay of one of those items being shipped in, the whole project of the mall is being delayed.
Because you can't put a front door on.
Correct. And then it's kind of like I built a case study out of that one, but there is like this National Geographic megastructures a documentary out there that talks about kind of like the Dubai Mall building, and they showcase how to bring the shark tunnel in and everything. And it's 4 pieces, and each one of the, or kind of like the shark tunnel, took up the production capabilities of an acrylic company, acrylic factory for a full year, and they brought them in from the US.
Oh yeah.
So my question here is, if one of them breaks, you cannot finish the fish tank. That is automatically delay of 3 months production plus sending plus everything that is in there. Why on earth, if one of those things cost you, let's say, $5 million, just as an example, I don't know how much it's probably more, but let's say $5 million, order one extra. Because if one of them breaks,
It's going
You
to
have a
be
3 month delay of the largest retail space in the world.
yeah, hundreds of
That
millions
you
of
kind of
dollars.
like have literally 10,000 workers coming in on the day shift to kind of like build this for 3 months delay. That's insane. Why did they do that? Because it was subcontracted. So the video actually, this documentary is awesome. It actually showcases how like the project manager sits there sweating, operating kind of like the leveling and kind of like bringing it down, all the problems that he's facing. And I'm thinking is for 5 million, the project manager is probably not the best person to play video game with kind of like leveling this down. Why don't you take, let's say, $20,000, hire a video console game producer that builds you kind of like a simulator. I mean, we have goat simulators for that matter. Build kind of like a lowering the tank simulator and let this guy plan for a week on how to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there are ways of how to overcome the risk management. It's just that project managers might not think in those terms.
So, do you think you would find similar situations by studying the case study of Dubai Mall and the Shark Tank?
Yeah.
Would you be able to, with some creativity, think through similar project risks in small projects?
Yeah, and you find them virtually everywhere. And like one tool, for example, that I use for medium and small sized ones is I look at the critical path. The critical path is ultimately the longest the project takes, the longest chain. So it's the fastest you can do the project. Any delay on any of the tasks inside the critical path will be an automated delay to the project.
Yeah.
So that means automatically every single project step or kind of like task on the critical path is a high risk item. So that means as a project manager, I should kind of like look specifically at those tasks and do what if something happens? How much would that delay be? And the delay of the project will automatically be the cost impact. So that gives me how much risk budget or kind of like risk exposure I have. And you should actually say, I mean, risk is kind of like one of those tricky things. No one knows what the risk is until it happens. So you're kind of like estimating beforehand. And that's why experience, for example, comes in. If you have done 50 projects, you can go, let's see how much that is. And a junior project manager might not have that exposure because it's nowhere written down. That's why, for example, in post-project communication or documentation, you need to document what risks were there, what happened, kind of like your incident log and kind of like all that stuff, so that future project managers, before they start the project, see, hey, listen, we went for this particular project, we had to build something and we got steel from this manufacturer or we had this or that, and they always had a delay. So it's like if you know that is in there, you can actually go in and say, is it worthwhile going with another vendor that gives you a guarantee or is like shorter delivery time frame or something like that. But the funniest thing that actually happened with the Dubai Mall was the night before they wanted to open, they actually pulled it and actually said, no, we're not doing a massive opening. We're actually doing a small kind of like small with media. And that was delayed by 3 months. And the reason behind that one was that someone came up with a brilliant idea to put 300 sharks into a fish tank. And sharks are very territorial. So I can totally see how someone actually said, it's like, oh, you want to put 50 sharks in there? We're Dubai, let's put 300 in there. And guess what they did? A week before the grand opening, when they started to populate the or kind of like a month or whatever the time frame was, the sharks started to kill each other off. So within a week, 40 of the sharks had killed each other.
Oh my God.
So the last thing that you want to have is at the great grand opening of Dubai Aquarium and Dubai Mall, that all of a sudden behind kind of like the person kind of like cutting the ribbon, two sharks go at each other and rip each other off.
Shark fight right in the middle of the ribbon opening.
And something like that must have happened because otherwise I cannot come up with any other excuse or reason why the night before the grand opening they're calling off the opening of the Dubai Mall and delayed by 3 months.
That's awesome.
So and again, it's like as a project manager might not be necessarily an expert in handling fish, right? So it's like it's unlikely that a project manager has a large fish tank at home, I mean, hint, hint, but it's kind of like understands how those things work. That's why project managers have to listen to the experts. And if, let's say, a low-level marine biologist that is in charge of the fish tank actually says, you know what, 300 sharks is a tough, bad idea, to go back to the sponsor and the owner of this whole thing to actually say, you know what, with 300 sharks, we're not doing.
Yeah.
And if that sponsor then comes back and actually says, yeah, but I want 300 sharks, what are you going to do? So as a project manager, again, here comes the ethical thing. You can actually say, you know what, screw the sharks. What we're actually doing out here is we put them in and hope for the best, because guess what? Once the project is over, not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
If I hand over and the day after the opening, all the sharks go at each other, it's not my problem anymore because project was delivered. And that is where, unfortunately, a lot of the, let's say, the ethics and the situations ultimately become dicey. It really depends. I mean, if a project has a good work breakdown structure and the work breakdown structure linked to resource allocation and so on, so kind of like the proper planning part behind it, I can randomly pick and choose some of those items and just see what is kind of like the timeline difference in there. And what you very often find that tasks early in the project are paid on time. It's like you have very quick outlay and kind of like everything is proper. But in a project that is not so well managed, that timeline in between utilization of the resources and accounting for the resources will widen.
What do you think makes a really great project team climate? An environment that lends itself to success. What does that look like?
Diverse, open, ethical, not with a personal connection. I mean, you need to have a certain personal connection to the outcome, not to the project itself. So if the benefit of the project is benefiting the people, then they have a vested interest in making the project happen and do it right. Mm-hmm. But if they're hired hands that are only interested in getting paid while the project is going on, there's no vested interest in the outcome, only in the management of the project. Yep. So there needs to be a certain level of incentive that the outcome of the project is actually meeting the specifications, is on budget, and so on. So I said ethics, cross-functionality. So you need to have some number guys, you need to have some presentation guys, some people guys, and so on. There needs to be a good level between experience, where people can draw from previous projects, but like more junior resources tend to be better in documentation because they follow more the rules, what is behind it, because they don't know better.
Still learning.
So still learning, but that means that they refer more to the standards, they refer more to the documentation, they make sure that everything is documented properly. Whereas an old dog out there would say, it's like, don't worry, no one is looking at that anyway, let's not do that. Yeah. So the junior would then say, no, we gotta do it because the standard says. So that's a good balancing act. So not only experienced people, but some lesser experience to balance that out.
That's a really great way to look at something, such as, diversity of age and experience of a project team. The benefit, the benefit doesn't come from two different ages. The benefit comes from, you're saying, the two different stages of learning where they are. Experience versus adherence to published standards.
Exactly. So to give you an example, when we do the Excellence Awards in Dubai Quality Award, Dubai Human Development Award, and so on, we mix up the teams with having very highly skilled and very experienced team leaders. But then we have some specialists in there that kind of like are senior assessors, they have kind of like the understanding and so on. But we always put juniors in there, because they're new to this process, so they are more bound to the actual kind of like mandate, to the criteria, and so on. And while they're being used very often to do the documentation step, they actually step up and say, hold on a second, we haven't done the following. And if you have a good kind of like control mechanism where they have the ability to bypass the team leader and actually raise a concern, raise a red flag, having a proper whistleblowing capability in there, for example, and there's some independent monitoring from the outside, it's a brilliant way to keep everyone on track. And unfortunately, there are no situations that can override an ethical system of a human being. Ethics is something personal. If people kind of like are willing to cheat, they will do it, whatever kind of like comes their way. And the more ethical people very often wash out, because when they speak up, they will be the ones being fired because they admit that there was a failure behind it. So unfortunately, there's a lot of kind of like dead wood or kind of like bad apples inside the profession. That's why the project control, the independent control on the project is so important, where other people without a vested interest in the success come in and validate that, whether that's consultants or the internal PMO teams or the project control teams or the finance guys or whatever. And that's kind of like where the tricky part comes up. If a finance manager goes in and actually says, are you really on budget? They will still sign off on that budget because they're only looking at, has the money been paid out or not? They only look at actual accounts. But they have not seen the invoice, therefore they cannot really control.
Yeah.
So project control goes a little bit further than pure risk control or pure finance control. In a project control, you need to have a little bit more the bird's eye view in understanding the different components behind it.
Well, that really wraps up my presentation on my interview with Mark Karshies. As you can tell, I mean, he's just a phenomenal person with a wealth of experience built over many years. He is a good friend of mine. We happen to be Boy Scout dads in the same troop, and he's got a wonderful family. He's a wealth of experience. We were on the record for about an hour and a half, and then we talked for about another hour off the record. So he's an asset to me. He's a bit of a mentor and a business coach. So I really do appreciate all of his time. I used Zencaster to capture the audio and brought that into my Mac, where I then, well, my daughter helped me use iMovie to put this presentation together. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I certainly enjoyed and learned from putting it together. Thank you.